Chapter 107. The Hound of the Baskervilles is my favorite book. In The Hound of the Baskervilles, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson get a visit from James Mortimer, who is a doctor from the moors in Devon. James Mortimer's friend, Sir Charles Baskerville, has died of a heart attack, and James Mortimer thinks that he might have been scared to death. James Mortimer also has an ancient scroll which describes the curse of the Baskervilles. On this scroll, it says that Sir Charles Baskerville had an ancestor called Sir Hugo Baskerville, who was a wild, profane, and godless man. He tried to do sex with the daughter of a yeoman, but she escaped, and he chased her across the moor. His friends, who were daredevil roisterers, chased after him. When they found him, the daughter of the yeoman had died of exhaustion and fatigue, and they saw a great black beast shaped like a hound, yet larger than any hound that ever mortal eye has rested on. And this hound was tearing the throat out of Sir Hugo Baskerville. And one of the friends died of fear that very night, and the other two were broken men for the rest of their days. James Mortimer thinks that the Hound of the Baskervilles might have scared Sir Charles to death, and he is worried that his son and heir, Sir Henry Baskerville, will be in danger when he goes to the Hall in Devon. So Sherlock Holmes sends Dr. Watson to Devon with Sir Henry Baskerville and James Mortimer. And Dr. Watson tries to work out who might have killed Sir Charles Baskerville. And Sherlock Holmes says he will stay in London, but he travels to Devon secretly and does investigations of his own. And Sherlock Holmes finds out that Sir Charles was killed by a neighbor called Stapleton, who is a butterfly collector and a distant relation of the Baskervilles. And Stapleton is poor, so he tries to kill Sir Henry Baskerville so he will inherit the hall. In order to do this, he's brought a huge dog from London and covered it in phosphorus to make it glow in the dark. And it was this dog which scared Charles Baskerville to death. And Sherlock Holmes and Watson and Lestrade from Scotland Yard catch him. And Sherlock Holmes and Watson shoot the dog, which is one of the dogs which gets killed in the story, which is not nice because it's not the dog's fault. Stapleton escapes into the Grimpen Mire, which is part of the moor, and he dies because he's sucked into a bog. There are some bits of the story I don't like. One bit is the ancient scroll, because it's written in old language which is difficult to understand, like this. Learn then from this story not to fear the fruits of the past, but rather to be circumspect in the future, that those foul passions whereby our family has suffered so grievously may not again be loosed to our undoing. And sometimes Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who is the author, describes people like this. There was something subtly wrong with the face, some coarseness of expression, some hardness, perhaps of eye, some looseness of lip, which marred its perfect beauty. And I don't know what some hardness, perhaps of eye, means, and I'm not interested in faces. But sometimes it is fun not knowing what the words mean because you can look them up in a dictionary, like goyal, which is a deep dip, or tors, which are hills or rocky heights. I like The Hound of the Baskervilles because it's a detective story, which means there are clues and red herrings. Here are some of the clues. Number 1. 2 of Sir Henry Baskerville's boots go missing when he is staying at a hotel in London. This means that someone wants to give them to the Hound of the Baskervilles to smell like a bloodhound so it can chase him. This means that the Hound of the Baskervilles is not a supernatural being, but a real dog. 2. Stapleton is the only person who knows how to get through the Grimpen Mire, and he tells Watson to stay out of it for his own safety. This means that he is hiding something in the middle of the Grimpen Mire and doesn't want anyone else to find it. And 3. Mrs. Stapleton tells Dr. Watson to go back to London instantly. This is because she thinks Dr. Watson is Sir Henry Baskerville, and she knows that her husband wants to kill him. And these are some of the red herrings. 1. Sherlock Holmes and Watson are followed when they're in London by a man in a coach with a black beard. This makes you think the man is Barrymore, who was the caretaker at Baskerville Hall, is the only other person who has a black beard. But the man is really Stapleton, who's wearing a false beard. Number 2, Selden, the Notting Hill murderer. This is a man who has escaped from prison nearby and is being hunted down on the moors, which makes you think he has something to do with the story because he's a criminal. But he doesn't have anything to do with the story at all. And 3, the man on the tour. This is a silhouette of a man that Dr. Watson sees on the moor at night but doesn't recognize, which makes you think it's the murderer. But it is Sherlock Holmes who has come to Devon secretly. I also like The Hound of the Baskervilles because I like Sherlock Holmes, and I think that if I were a proper detective, he's the kind of detective I would be. He's very intelligent, and he solves the mystery, and he says, the world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chance ever observes. But he notices them, like I do. Also, it says in the book, Sherlock Holmes had, in a very remarkable degree, the power of detaching his mind at will. And this is like me too, because if I get really interested in something, like practicing math or reading a book about Apollo missions or great white sharks, I don't notice anything else. And Father can be calling to me to come and eat my supper, and I won't hear him. And this is why I'm very good at playing chess, because I detach my mind at will and concentrate on the board, and after a while, the person I am playing will stop concentrating and start scratching their nose or staring out the window, and then they will make a mistake, and I will win. Also, Dr. Watson says about Sherlock Holmes, his mind was very busy in endeavoring to frame some scheme to which all these strange and apparently disconnected episodes could be fitted. And that is what I'm trying to do by writing this book. Also, Sherlock Holmes doesn't believe in the supernatural, which is God and fairy tales and hounds of hell and curses, which are stupid things. Now I'm going to finish this chapter with 2 interesting facts about Sherlock Holmes. Number 1, in the original Sherlock Holmes story, Sherlock Holmes is never described as wearing a deerstalker hat, which is what he is always wearing in pictures and cartoons. The deerstalker hat was invented by a man called Sidney Paget, who did the illustrations for the original books. In the original Sherlock Holmes story, Sherlock Holmes never says elementary, my dear Watson. He only ever says this in films and on the television. Chapter 109. That night, I wrote some more of my book, and the next morning I took it to school so that Siobhan could read it and tell me if I had made mistakes with the spelling and the grammar. Siobhan read the book during the morning break when she has a cup of coffee and sits at the edge of the playground with the other teachers. After morning break, she came and sat down next to me and said she had read the bit about my conversation with Mrs. Alexander, and she said, "Have you told your father about this?" And I replied, "No." And she said, "Are you going to tell your father about this?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Good. I think that's a good idea, Christopher." And then she said, "Did it make you sad to find this out?" And I asked, "Find out what?" And she said, "Did it make you upset to find out that your mother and Mr. Shears had an affair?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Are you telling the truth, Christopher?" And I said, "I always tell the truth." And she said, "I know you do, Christopher, but sometimes we get sad about things, and we don't like to tell other people we're sad about things. We like to keep it a secret. Or sometimes we're sad, but we don't really know we're sad. So we say we aren't sad, but we really are." And I said, "I'm not sad." And she said, "If you do start to feel sad about this, I want you to know that you can come and talk to me about it. Because I think talking to me will help you feel less sad. If you don't feel sad, but you just want to talk to me about it, that would be okay too. Do you understand?" And I said, "I understand." And she said, "Good." And I replied, "But I don't feel sad about it because Mother is dead, because Mr. Shears isn't around anymore. So I'd be feeling sad about something that isn't real and doesn't exist, and that would be stupid." Then I practiced math for the rest of the morning, and at lunch I didn't have the quiche because it was yellow, but I did have the carrots and the peas and lots of tomato ketchup. And for afters, I had some blackberry and apple crumble but not the crumble bit because that was yellow too. And I got Mrs. Davis to take the crumble bit off before she put it onto my plate because it doesn't matter if different sorts of food are touching before they are actually on your plate. Then, after lunch, I spent the afternoon doing art with Mrs. Peters, and I painted some pictures of aliens, which looked like this. Chapter 113. My memory is like a film. That is why I'm really good at remembering things like the conversations I have written down in this book, and what people are wearing, and what they smelled like, because my memory has a smell track, which is like a soundtrack. And when people ask me to remember something, I can simply press rewind and fast forward and pause, like on a video recorder. But more like a DVD player because I don't have to rewind through everything in between to get to a memory of something a long time ago. There are no buttons either because it's happening in my head. If someone says to me, Christopher, tell me what your mother was like, I can rewind to lots of different scenes and say what she was like in these scenes. For example, I could rewind to 4th of July 1992 when I was 9 years old, which was a Saturday, and we were on holiday in Cornwall. In the afternoon, we were on the beach in a place called Polperro. Mother was wearing a pair of shorts made out of denim and a light blue bikini top, and she was smoking cigarettes called Consulate, which were mint flavor, and she wasn't swimming. Mother was sunbathing on a towel, which had red and purple stripes, and she was reading a book by Georgette Heyer called The Masqueraders. And then she finished sunbathing and went into the water to swim, and she said, Bloody Nora, it's cold. And she said I should come and swim too, but I don't like swimming because I don't like taking my clothes off. She said I should just roll up my trousers and walk into the water a little way. So I did. I stood in the water, and Mother said, Look, it's lovely. And she jumped backward and disappeared under the water. And I thought a shocker had eaten her. And I screamed as she stood up out of the water again and came over to where I was standing and held her right hand and spread her fingers out in a fan and said, Come on, Christopher, touch my hand. Come on now, stop screaming, touch my hand. Listen to me, Christopher, you can do it. And after a while, I stopped screaming and held up my left hand and spread my fingers out in a fan. And we made our fingers and thumbs touch each other. And Mother said, It's okay, Christopher, it's okay. There aren't any sharks in Cornwall. And then I felt better. Except for I can't remember anything before I was 4 because I wasn't really looking at things the right way before then, so they didn't get recorded properly. And this is how I recognize someone if I don't know who they are. I see what they're wearing, or if they have a walking stick, or funny hair, or certain types of glasses, or they have a particular way of moving their arms. And I do a search through my memories to see if I've met them before. And this is how I know how to act in difficult situations when I don't know what to do. So, for example, if people say things which don't make sense, like see you later, alligator, or you'll catch your death in that, do a search and see if I've ever heard someone say this before. And if someone is lying on the floor at school, I do a search through my memory to find a picture of someone having an epileptic fit, and then I compare the picture to what is happening in front of me so I can decide whether they're just laying down and playing a game or having a sleep or whether they're having an epileptic fit. If they are having an epileptic fit, I move any furniture out of the way to stop them from banging their head, and I take my jumper off and I put it underneath their head and I go find a teacher. Other people have pictures in their heads too. They're different because the other people have pictures in their heads too. But they are different because the pictures in my head are all pictures of things which really happened. But other people have pictures in their heads of things which aren't real and didn't happen. For example, sometimes Mother used to say, If I hadn't married your father, I think I'd be living in a little farmhouse in the south of France with someone called Jean, and he'd be, a local handyman, doing painting and decorating for people, gardening, building fences, and we'd have a veranda with figs growing over it, and there would be a field of sunflowers at the bottom of the garden, and a little town on the hill in the distance, and we'd sit outside in the evening and drink red wine and smoke Gauloise cigarettes and watch the sun go down. And Siobhan said once that when she felt depressed or sad, she would close her eyes and she would imagine she was staying in a house on Cape Cod with her friend Ellie. And they would take a trip on a boat from Provincetown and they'd go out into the bay to watch the humpback whales, and that made her feel calm and peaceful and happy. And sometimes when someone has died, like Mother died, people say, "What would you want to say to your mother if she was here now?" Or, "What would your mother think about that?" Which is stupid because Mother is dead and you can't say anything to people who are dead, and dead people can't think. And Grandmother has pictures in her head too, but her pictures are all confused, like someone muddled the film up and she can't tell what happened in what order. So she thinks that dead people are still alive, and she doesn't know whether something happened in real life or whether it happened on television.